19-year-old Ellie Barrett thought inheriting her grandfather's abandoned motel would be the worst thing to happen after losing her parents. She was wrong, because hidden behind a sealed wall inside Silver Pines Lodge was a room that had never been checked out. No records, no witnesses, just a missing man, a forgotten cassette tape, and a terrifying message buried for nearly 30 years. If you're hearing this, I never left. What Ellie uncovers inside that motel will force an entire town to confront the truth they tried to bury forever. If you believe every forgotten voice deserves to be heard, make sure to subscribe before we begin. At 19 years old, Ellie Barrett had already learned how quickly life could empty itself out. 3 months after losing both of her parents in a highway pileup outside Flagstaff, she found herself driving through the frozen backroads of northern Montana toward a place she barely remembered, Silver Pines Lodge. The motel stood alone beside an abandoned highway, swallowed by snowdrifts and silence. Half the neon sign had burned out years ago, leaving only the word Pines flickering weakly against the gray evening sky. The parking lot was cracked with weeds pushing through the ice, and the office windows looked dark enough to hide decades. Ellie tightened her hands around the steering wheel. She almost kept driving. Her grandfather, Thomas Barrett, had owned the lodge for most of his life, but after he died the previous winter, the property had been left untouched. No buyers, no visitors, no family willing to come near it. And now, somehow, it belonged to her. The plan was simple: clear out the building, sign the papers, and disappear before the memories could settle in. But the moment she stepped into the dusty front office, she noticed something strange. 11 rooms, 12 keys, and one of them had no number at all. The next morning, snow drifted softly against the windows of Silver Pines Lodge, covering the empty parking lot in a sheet of pale white silence. Ellie Barrett stood alone behind the front desk, wrapping both hands around a chipped coffee mug she'd found in one of the cabinets. The coffee tasted terrible, but the warmth helped. She hadn't slept much. Every sound in the motel seemed louder at night, the pipes groaning inside the walls, the wind rattling the old signage outside, the occasional creak overhead that sounded almost like footsteps. The place didn't feel abandoned. It felt like it was waiting. Ellie glanced again at the old wooden key rack mounted behind the desk. 11 numbered hooks. 11 room keys. And then there was the extra one, a tarnished brass key hanging alone at the bottom corner. No number, no label, just worn metal dulled by time. She stepped closer and lifted it carefully from its hook. The metal was colder than she expected, almost painfully cold against her skin. Something about it unsettled her. The motel layout she remembered from childhood only had 11 rooms. She used to visit once every few summers before her parents stopped speaking to her grandfather altogether. Back then, the place had still been alive with truckers smoking outside the rooms, old country music drifting from the office radio, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the lobby. But now, it felt frozen in another decade. Ellie grabbed a flashlight from beneath the counter and pulled on her coat. Outside, the air bit through her clothes instantly. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she walked slowly along the motel walkway, counting the doors one by one. Room 1, Room 2, Room 3. Everything exactly where it should be. But when she reached the gap between rooms 5 and 6, she stopped. There was too much space. Her eyes narrowed. The wall stretched longer there than it should have, a section hidden beneath climbing ivy and warped wooden paneling. It looked wrong once you noticed it. Like something had been covered up in a hurry years ago and everyone simply agreed never to mention it again. Ellie stepped closer, brushing snow and dead vines aside with trembling hands. And there it was. A door. narrower than the others, painted dark green beneath layers of peeling varnish. No room number. Her heartbeat slowed, then quickened harder. The brass key fit perfectly into the lock. For a second, she hesitated. Every instinct told her to walk away. But loneliness has a strange way of making people brave. The lock clicked. The door groaned inward. A wave of cold air spilled from inside, carrying the scent of dust, mildew, and something older, something untouched. Ellie swept the flashlight across the room slowly. A single iron bed sat against the wall beneath a small window covered by faded curtains. A wooden desk stood near the corner, its surface coated in gray dust. Beside it rested an old cassette recorder. The room looked preserved, not abandoned. Preserved, like someone had left expecting to come back. Her breathing grew shallow. On the desk sat an old guest registration slip. The ink had faded, but she could still read it. Name Daniel Mercer, check-in. Date November 14th, 1998. Room checkout. Blank. Ellie stared at the paper. The name meant nothing to her at first, but then she remembered hearing it once. Years ago. Her mother had mentioned it during an argument with her father late one night. She'd only been a child, half asleep at the top of the stairs while voices drifted up from below. Your father knows more about Daniel Mercer than he ever admitted. That was all she remembered. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, it made her stomach tighten. Ellie turned toward the cassette recorder sitting beside the registration slip. A tape was already inside. On top of it, written in faded black marker, were 5 words. If anyone finds this. Her fingers trembled as she pressed play. Static crackled through the tiny speaker. Then a man's voice emerged. Low, tired, afraid. My name is Daniel Mercer. If you're listening to this, then I guess someone finally opened the room. Ellie froze. I came to Silver Pines Lodge 6 weeks ago investigating land purchases tied to Black Hollow County. Properties bought cheap, families forced out. Missing records, missing people. The tape hissed softly. At first, I thought it was just corruption. Then I realized people were disappearing after asking too many questions. Ellie's pulse pounded in her ears. There's a sheriff involved, county officials too. Maybe more. I tried leaving twice, both times someone followed me back here. A long pause. Then, Thomas Barrett told me to stay quiet. Said they were dangerous men, said if I kept digging, I'd end up buried somewhere no one would ever look. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Her grandfather knew him. The voice continued. I don't think Thomas is a bad man. I think he's scared. Maybe too scared to stop what's happening. Another pause. If this tape is still here, then something happened to me. The recording crackled violently for a second. Then the man whispered one final sentence. Don't trust the sheriff. The tape clicked off. Silence swallowed the room instantly. Ellie stood motionless beside the desk, unable to breathe properly. Outside, wind howled across the highway like a distant scream. Her grandfather had lied to everyone. And somehow, this room had been hiding the truth for over 20 years. Ellie slowly backed away from the desk, her flashlight beam shaking violently across the walls. That's when she noticed something else, scratched faintly into the wood beside the bed. 3 words. He never left. Ellie stumbled backward. The floor creaked sharply beneath her feet, and somewhere deep inside the motel, something heavy slammed shut. Ellie Barrett didn't sleep that night. She sat alone behind the front desk of Silver Pines Lodge with every light turned on, the cassette recorder resting beside her like evidence from a crime scene no one had bothered solving. Outside, Snow battered the windows harder as midnight settled over the abandoned highway. The neon sign buzzed weakly in the darkness, flickering on and off like it was struggling to stay alive. Ellie kept hearing the same sentence in her mind. If this tape is still here, then something happened to me. She looked toward the hallway leading to the hidden room. The room Daniel Mercer never checked out of. The room her grandfather had hidden. The room that technically wasn't supposed to exist. Her chest tightened. All her life, Thomas Barrett had been the quiet old man who mailed birthday cards with $20 bills tucked inside. The man who smelled like cigarette smoke and pine wood. The man her mother refused to talk about near the end of her life. Now she was beginning to understand why. Ellie reached for the old registration slip again. Daniel Mercer, November 14th, 1998. 28 years ago. Missing. Forgotten. Buried inside a motel wall. She rubbed her tired eyes and finally opened one of the filing cabinets behind the counter. Most of the folders were ruined from moisture and age, but near the very back she found an old ledger wrapped tightly in plastic. Inside were property records. Dozens of them. Farmhouses, trailers, small family-owned stores. Every single property had eventually been sold to the same development company, Black Hollow Holdings. Ellie frowned. The name appeared over and over again across nearly 15 years of paperwork, and beside several transactions was her grandfather's signature. Her stomach dropped. "No," she whispered. She flipped faster through the pages. Large payments, cash transfers, land surveys, and handwritten notes. One line, scribbled beside a property acquisition, made her blood run cold. Family relocated after pressure from county. Pressure. Not agreement, not negotiation. Pressure. Ellie leaned back in the chair, breathing unevenly. Her grandfather hadn't just known something bad was happening. He'd been involved. A loud bang suddenly echoed outside. Ellie jumped violently. For one terrifying second, she thought someone had entered the motel, but then she heard it again, metal clanging against metal. She rushed to the office window and pulled the curtain aside. A black pickup truck sat idling near the road beyond the gate. Its headlights pointed directly at the motel. The engine rumbled low in the snow. Ellie couldn't see the driver. The truck stayed there for nearly 30 seconds, watching, then slowly backed away into the darkness. Her hands shook uncontrollably now. Someone knew she was here. And somehow, they already knew she'd opened the room. The realization hit her so hard she almost felt dizzy. She locked the office door immediately and checked every window in the motel twice before retreating back behind the counter. Her phone buzzed suddenly against the desk. A known number. Ellie hesitated before answering. "Hello." Static crackled softly. Then an older man's voice spoke quietly. "You shouldn't stay there after dark." Ellie's heart stopped. "Who is this?" The man ignored the question. If Thomas kept the room sealed, he had a reason. "How do you know about that room?" A long silence followed. Then, "Because I helped build the wall." The line went dead. Ellie stared at the phone in horror. Every instinct screamed at her to leave immediately. Pack the car, drive south. Forget all of it. But another feeling had begun growing stronger than fear. Anger. Daniel Mercer had disappeared inside this place, and everybody had simply moved on. No investigation, no justice, no truth. Just silence. Ellie looked again toward the hidden room, then toward the storm outside, and finally toward the framed photograph hanging crookedly behind the desk. Thomas Barrett stood smiling beside the motel sign sometime in the late 80s. Younger, proud, alive. She stepped closer to the photo slowly. "What did you do?" she whispered. The motel answered with silence. By morning, the storm had eased. Ellie drove into Black Hollow County for the first time since arriving. Desperate for answers beyond dusty tapes and hidden ledgers, the town looked exactly like the kind of place secrets survive in. Quiet streets, old diners, faded storefronts, people who glanced too long at strangers. At the county library, Ellie searched newspaper archives from late 1998. Most articles were forgettable. Local elections, school sports, winter storms. Then she found it. A small article buried near the bottom of page 7. Freelance reporter missing after cross-country trip. Daniel Mercer's photograph stared back at her from the page. Young, dark-haired, tired eyes. The article quoted Sheriff Dean Holloway directly. Mr. Mercer likely left the county voluntarily. There is no evidence of foul play. Ellie's jaw tightened. A lie. A carefully printed lie. Because Daniel Mercer never left Silver Pines Lodge. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page, and froze instantly. Another article, smaller, published 3 weeks later. Local motel owner questioned in missing person case. Thomas Barrett. Ellie scanned the article desperately. According to the report, her grandfather had been questioned briefly regarding Mercer's disappearance, but was later cleared of suspicion due to lack of evidence. No follow-up investigation was ever mentioned again. A case closed. Just like that. Ellie sat back slowly in her chair. Someone had buried this intentionally. Not just Daniel Mercer. The entire truth. As she gathered the newspaper copies, the elderly librarian behind the desk suddenly spoke. You're staying at the old lodge, aren't you? Ellie looked up carefully. The woman's expression had changed. Nervous, uneasy. How do you know that? The librarian lowered her voice. Because people in this town still cross the street when they drive past it. Ellie swallowed hard. Why? The woman hesitated. Then quietly said, because some folks believe Daniel Mercer never left that place. A cold chill moved through Ellie's body. The librarian leaned closer, and because the men connected to his disappearance, she glanced toward the window. We're still alive. Ellie's blood turned to ice. Back at the motel that evening, she found something waiting outside her office door. A plain white envelope. No stamp, no address. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. Daniel Mercer, standing outside Silver Pines Lodge the night he disappeared. And written across the bottom in black marker were 6 words. You should have left this alone. Ellie stared at the message for a long time, then slowly looked toward the hidden room. For the first time since arriving, she realized this wasn't just an old mystery anymore. Someone was still protecting it. Ellie Barrett stayed inside Silver Pines Lodge for the next 2 days. Not because she felt safe there, because leaving somehow felt worse. The motel had changed after the photograph appeared. Or maybe she had. Every hallway now carried a different kind of weight. The silence no longer felt empty, it felt crowded. Like the walls themselves had been holding their breath for decades, waiting for someone reckless enough to start asking questions again. And Ellie had. The hidden room no longer scared her the way it had before. Now it made her sad. Sad for Daniel Mercer. Sad for whoever he had been before fear hollowed out his voice on that cassette tape. Sad for the terrified man who kept recording messages because he knew no one was coming to save him. But most of all, she felt something she never expected to feel toward her grandfather. Disappointment. Thomas Barrett had always existed in her memories, like an unfinished photograph, blurry around the edges, but comforting. The old man who slipped extra marshmallows into her hot chocolate when her parents weren't looking. The man who taught her how to shuffle cards during snowstorms. And now every memory felt stained. Because somewhere beneath all those quiet smiles, He had helped bury a man's disappearance. Ellie sat alone in the office late that night with one of the old ledgers spread across the counter. Snow drifted slowly outside the windows while the motel heater rattled weakly through the walls. She kept rereading the same signatures. Thomas Barrett, Thomas Barrett, Thomas Barrett. Each one felt heavier than the last. Finally, frustrated, she slammed the ledger shut. A cloud of dust rose into the air. That was when she noticed something hidden beneath the counter drawer. A small wooden box. Ellie frowned. She knelt carefully and pulled it free. The box was old and scratched along the edges, sealed with a rusted brass latch. For a moment, she simply stared at it, her pulse quickening. Then she opened it. Letters. Dozens of them. Some folded neatly, others crumpled and stained. All addressed to the same name, a Daniel Mercer. Ellie's breath caught instantly. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her grandfather's. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the first letter carefully. Daniel, I keep trying to convince myself I had no choice. But the truth is, I did. I just wasn't brave enough to make it. Ellie swallowed hard. She grabbed another. They told me if I spoke, people would get hurt. Maybe they were lying. Maybe I wanted an excuse to stay silent. Another, you kept saying the truth mattered more than fear. I wish I'd believed that sooner. Her vision blurred slightly. The letters weren't defenses. They were confessions. Some were unfinished, ending mid-sentence like Thomas Barrett couldn't bear to continue writing them. Others were stained with watermarks that looked painfully close to tears. One letter near the bottom made Ellie stop breathing entirely. I heard them take you out of the room that night. I heard you yelling, and I did nothing. Ellie covered her mouth. The motel suddenly felt colder. Not haunted by ghosts. Haunted by cowardice. For the first time since arriving, Ellie understood something important. Her grandfather hadn't been evil. He had been weak. And weakness, left unchecked long enough, had destroyed lives just as effectively as cruelty ever could. Ellie leaned back slowly in the chair, gripping the letters tightly against her chest. All these years, Thomas Barrett had carried this alone. Not because he was innocent, because guilt had become the only punishment he believed he deserved. A loud gust of wind rattled the motel windows violently, snapping Ellie from her thoughts. She looked toward the hidden hallway leading to the room. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape now. The room no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a wound, one no one had ever allowed to heal. Later that evening, Ellie walked quietly through the snow toward the hidden door. The motel lights glowed faintly behind her as freezing wind swept across the abandoned highway. She stopped outside the room for a long moment, then slowly stepped inside. The air smelled old, still heavy with memory. The cassette recorder remained exactly where she'd left it. The bed untouched, the desk frozen in time. Ellie moved slowly through the room until she stood beside the small window overlooking the highway. Daniel Mercer had probably stood in this exact spot 28 years earlier, wondering if he would survive the night. And deep down, he probably already knew the answer. Ellie closed her eyes briefly. "I'm sorry," she whispered softly. Not just to Daniel, to her grandfather too. Because now she understood the terrible truth hiding underneath everything. Thomas Barrett had spent the rest of his life trapped inside this room too. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Every day afterward had probably felt like another unfinished confession. Another act of silence. Another betrayal he could never undo. Ellie opened her eyes slowly, and in that moment, something inside her shifted. She could leave. Sell the motel, Burn the letters. Forget all of it. That would be easier. But easy was exactly how people like Daniel Mercer disappeared in the first place. Because everyone chose comfort over truth. Ellie looked around the room one final time, then made her decision. The next morning, she drove back into town carrying the letters, the cassette tapes, and copies of every document she'd found. This time, she didn't go to the library. She walked straight into the office of the Black Hollow Gazette. The newspaper building looked nearly abandoned itself, flickering fluorescent lights. Dusty windows, faded newspapers stacked beside the door. An older man looked up from behind the counter. "You need something?" he asked. Ellie placed the box of letters gently in front of him. Her voice stayed steady. "I think my grandfather helped cover up a disappearance." The man froze. Ellie slid Daniel Mercer's photograph across the desk. "And I think people in this town already know that." Silence filled the room. The editor stared at the letters for a long moment before finally speaking. "I knew Thomas Barrett," he said quietly. Ellie nodded once. "So did I." The man exhaled slowly, then looked her directly in the eyes. "If you open this story back up," he warned softly, "some very dangerous people are going to notice." Ellie thought about the hidden room, the cassette tape, the photograph left at her door, the sentence scratched beside the bed. He never left. Then she answered quietly, "Maybe it's time they realized neither did the truth." The article was published the following Friday. Not on the front page, not in bold headlines. Just a quiet column halfway down page 4 of the Black Hollow Gazette. Hidden room at Silver Pines Lodge may be connected to 1998 disappearance. Ellie Barrett read it alone at the front desk while morning light spilled weakly through the office windows. The article included portions of Daniel Mercer's cassette recording, excerpts from Thomas Barrett's letters, and details about the hidden room buried inside the motel walls for nearly 3 decades. No accusations, no dramatic conclusions, just facts. But facts have a dangerous way of waking sleeping things. For the first 2 days, nothing happened. The motel remained silent, except for the wind moving across the highway and the soft humming of the broken vending machine near room 3. Then, on Sunday afternoon, a car pulled into the parking lot. Ellie looked up from the front desk nervously. An older woman stepped out slowly, clutching a small purse against her chest. She stood beside her car for nearly a minute, just staring at the motel sign. Then she walked toward the office. "I read the article," she said quietly after stepping inside. Ellie nodded cautiously. The woman's eyes drifted toward the hallway. "My brother disappeared in this county in 2002, she whispered. "Everyone said he ran away." A long silence followed. Then, "I just wanted to see the place." Ellie didn't know what to say. "So instead," she simply replied, "you can stay as long as you need." The woman never rented a room. She walked slowly down the hallway, stood outside the hidden room for several minutes, then quietly left a flower beside the door before returning to her car. Ellie watched her drive away through falling snow. Something inside her shifted after that, because suddenly, Daniel Mercer wasn't just one forgotten man anymore. He was proof. Proof that silence had lived inside this county for a very long time. And other people carried pieces of it too. Over the next few weeks, more visitors started appearing. Not crowds, just individuals. Quiet people with tired eyes. A retired truck driver from Idaho stopped by after reading the article online. He sat in the office for nearly an hour before finally admitting his former business partner vanished near Black Hollow County back in the late 90s. A woman from Oregon arrived carrying a faded photograph of her missing cousin. Another man simply walked into the motel lobby, looked around silently, and whispered, This place feels like it remembers things. Ellie never corrected him, because somehow it did. The hidden room changed too. At first, Ellie kept the door locked whenever visitors came, but eventually she stopped. People rarely entered it for long. Most simply stood quietly inside, reading the scratches beside the bed or staring at the old cassette recorder resting on the desk. Some cried, others just breathed differently afterward. One evening, Ellie found a folded note left beneath the lamp inside the room. "I thought my story disappeared too. Thank you for proving forgotten things still matter." She read the sentence 3 times, then carefully placed the note back where she found it. A few days later, the motel phone rang for the first time since she arrived. The sharp sound startled her so badly she nearly dropped her coffee mug. "Silver Pines Lodge," she answered carefully. A pause. Then an older man spoke. "My name is Walter Grayson," he said quietly. "I used to work maintenance here back in '98. Ellie sat upright instantly. "You knew Daniel Mercer." A long silence crackled through the phone line. "I knew he was scared," the man finally admitted. "And I knew your grandfather was terrified." Ellie's throat tightened. "Did you know what happened to him?" "No," Walter whispered quickly, "but I heard men arguing outside the room that night. Sheriff Holloway was one of them." Ellie closed her eyes briefly. Another confirmation. Another thread pulling the buried truth closer to the surface. Before hanging up, Walter said one final thing. "Your grandfather wasn't the man people think he was." Ellie frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" The old man exhaled shakily. He hated himself for staying quiet. You could see it eating him alive every year afterward. The line disconnected. Ellie remained motionless behind the desk long after the call ended. Because deep down, she already knew. Thomas Barrett hadn't escaped the hidden room either. He had simply spent the rest of his life carrying it inside him. That night, Ellie reopened the small coffee station in the motel lobby. Not because she planned to run a business, but because the silence inside the building no longer felt empty anymore. People were coming here carrying pain. And somehow, the motel was listening. She cleaned the old countertop carefully, repaired the dusty coffee maker, and placed a handwritten sign beside it. "Coffee is free. So is the truth." The next morning, a college student named Grace Holloway stopped by after seeing the article shared online. She couldn't have been much older than Ellie. "I know this sounds weird," Grace admitted nervously. "But do you need help around here?" Ellie blinked. "With what?" Grace glanced around the motel slowly. "With whatever this place is becoming." The question lingered heavily in the air, because Ellie wasn't entirely sure herself. Silver Pines Lodge was no longer just an abandoned motel, but it wasn't exactly a business either. It had become something stranger. A place where people arrived carrying memories they'd spent years trying to bury. And somehow, they left lighter. That evening, Ellie stood alone outside the hidden room beneath the dim hallway lights. She reached into her pocket and unfolded the small note someone had left earlier that day. 3 simple words. "I was heard." Ellie stared at the sentence quietly, then looked toward the old motel lobby glowing softly against the falling snow. For the first time since arriving at Silver Pines Lodge, she no longer felt like she was trapped there. She felt needed. And maybe that was even more frightening. Because now she understood something her grandfather never did. The truth wasn't just something buried. Sometimes, it was something waiting to heal. Winter settled heavily over Silver Pines Lodge. By December, snow buried the edges of the abandoned highway so deeply that passing cars became rare. Most nights, the motel existed in complete isolation, just wind moving through the pine trees and the faint glow of the office lights cutting through the darkness. But despite the cold, People still came. Not for rooms, not for comfort, for answers. Ellie Barrett stopped trying to explain what Silver Pines had become. The hidden room no longer belonged only to Daniel Mercer. It had turned into something larger now, a place where forgotten grief seemed to gather naturally. The guest journal inside the room was nearly full. Some entries were only one sentence. My father disappeared in 2004. No one believed me. I finally said this out loud. Others stretched across entire pages. Confessions written by people who had spent decades carrying silence alone. Ellie read every single one, because she understood now what loneliness really sounded like. It sounded like people apologizing for their pain. One snowy evening, Grace was helping clean the coffee station when she suddenly froze near the office window. Ellie. Her voice dropped nervously. There's someone outside. Ellie looked up instantly. A dark sedan sat parked near the edge of the lot, headlights off, the engine running. Watching, Ellie's stomach tightened immediately. The same feeling she'd had the night the black truck appeared weeks earlier crawled slowly up her spine again. Grace stepped closer to her. Do you know them? Ellie shook her head slowly. No. The car remained there for almost 10 minutes. Neither woman moved. Finally, the driver's side door opened. An older man stepped out. Late 60s, tall, gray overcoat dusted with snow. And even from across the parking lot, Ellie recognized him instantly. Sheriff Dean Holloway. Or rather, former Sheriff Dean Holloway. The same man quoted in the newspaper article from 1998. The same name Daniel Mercer warned her about on the cassette tape. Grace whispered, "Oh my God." The old sheriff approached the office slowly, his expression unreadable beneath the falling snow. Ellie's pulse hammered violently as she opened the office door before he could knock. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Holloway glanced toward the hidden hallway. "So," he said quietly, "you found the room." Ellie crossed her arms tightly. "You knew it existed." The old sheriff gave a tired nod. "Yes." The honesty caught her off guard. "You covered up Daniel Mercer's disappearance." A shadow passed across Holloway's face. It wasn't that simple. Ellie almost laughed. "Funny how it never is." The sheriff removed his gloves slowly, revealing trembling hands. And suddenly, he looked old. Not powerful, not dangerous. Just tired. "I came because you're digging in places that should have stayed buried," he said carefully. Ellie's anger flared instantly. "Because someone was murdered." Holloway looked down, then quietly replied, "Yes." The word hit the room like broken glass. Grace covered her mouth. Ellie stopped breathing for a second. Because until now, there had still been uncertainty. Fear, suspicion, theory. But this was different. A confession. The sheriff looked toward the hidden room again, his eyes hollow with memory. Daniel Mercer got too close, he admitted softly. He uncovered land contracts tied to county officials, developers, men with money. Men who didn't tolerate problems. Ellie's hands curled into fists. "And my grandfather." Holloway closed his eyes briefly. Thomas Barrett tried to help him leave. Ellie froze. "What?" The sheriff looked at her directly. The tape only told part of the story. The room suddenly felt smaller. He hid Daniel inside that room because he thought it would buy him time. Holloway continued, "Your grandfather was terrified, but he wasn't trying to hurt the kid." Ellie's heart pounded painfully now. "Then what happened?" The sheriff's silence lasted too long. Finally, he answered, "Somebody else found out." A cold chill moved through Ellie's body. "Who?" Holloway hesitated, then whispered, "County Commissioner Robert Vane." The name meant nothing to Ellie, but the fear in Holloway's voice did. "He's still alive," the sheriff added quietly, "still powerful, and if he learns what you've uncovered—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Grace stepped backward nervously. Ellie stared at the old man standing in front of her. "You're admitting all this now?" she asked. "After almost 30 years. Holloway laughed bitterly under his breath. "You think I sleep." Silence swallowed the office. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Then the sheriff reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the counter. A motel room key. Old brass, faded. Room 8. Ellie frowned. "What is this?" Holloway looked toward the hidden hallway one final time. The room Daniel was taken through. Ellie's blood ran cold. "There's another room." The sheriff nodded once. A basement access tunnel beneath room 8. Smugglers used it back in the 70s when the highway was still active. Most people forgot it existed. Ellie's pulse exploded. Daniel Mercer hadn't simply vanished from the motel. He'd been removed through it. Holloway stepped toward the door slowly. Before leaving, he paused. "Your grandfather tried to stop them that night," he said quietly. "That's the part nobody knows." Ellie's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" The sheriff looked at her sadly. "He died believing Daniel's blood was on his hands." Then he walked back into the snow. The sedan disappeared into the darkness moments later. Inside the office, neither Ellie nor Grace spoke for a long time. Finally, Grace whispered, "What if there's still something down there?" Ellie looked at the room 8 key resting in her palm. Cold, heavy, waiting. Then, slowly, she turned toward the dark hallway leading deeper into the motel. And for the first time since arriving at Silver Pines Lodge, she realized the truth hadn't fully surfaced yet. Because somewhere beneath the motel, the rest of Daniel Mercer's story was still buried. The entrance to the tunnel was hidden exactly where Sheriff Holloway said it would be, beneath the stained carpet inside room 8. Ellie Barrett stood frozen beside the lifted floor hatch while Grace aimed a flashlight downward into the darkness below. Cold air drifted upward from the opening, carrying the scent of wet earth and rust. The tunnel looked ancient, forgotten, like something the motel itself had tried to bury. "You don't have to do this tonight," Grace whispered carefully. But Ellie already knew she would, because every answer she'd uncovered had only led deeper underground. And somewhere inside her, the frightened 19-year-old girl who arrived here planning to sell the motel had started disappearing. In her place stood someone else, someone who could no longer walk away. Ellie climbed down first. The wooden ladder groaned beneath her weight as darkness swallowed the light from above. The tunnel stretched narrow beneath the motel foundation, lined with old concrete and rusted utility pipes. Water dripped steadily somewhere far ahead. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Grace's flashlight caught something against the wall. Scratches. Dozens of them. Tallies. Ellie's chest tightened instantly. Someone had spent time down here. A lot of time. The further they walked, the colder the tunnel became. Finally, near the very end, Ellie's flashlight landed on a small metal door, half buried behind collapsed wooden beams. The handle was rusted shut. Together, they forced it open. The smell inside nearly knocked the breath out of Ellie. Dust, mold, decay. The room beyond was tiny, barely larger than a storage closet, and in the center sat a folding chair, ropes still tied to its arms. Grace gasped quietly behind her. Ellie couldn't move. The walls suddenly felt too close, too heavy. This wasn't theory anymore. This wasn't rumor or old newspaper stories. Daniel Mercer had been here. and he hadn't left willingly. Ellie stepped deeper into the room slowly, her flashlight trembling in her grip. Then she saw it. A cassette tape, resting beneath the chair. Her pulse exploded. She grabbed it carefully, staring at the faded handwriting across the label. November 18th, 1998. 4 days after Daniel Mercer checked into Silver Pines Lodge, Ellie's throat tightened painfully. Back upstairs, they played the tape in complete silence. Static filled the office first. Then came Daniel's voice, weak, shaking. If someone finds this, then Thomas failed. Ellie closed her eyes briefly. He tried to help me leave tonight. Daniel continued. I think he finally realized these people were never going to let either of us go. A long pause crackled through the speakers. Then, they caught us before we reached the highway. Grace covered her mouth. Ellie's hands trembled violently now. Thomas kept saying he was sorry, over and over. Daniel's breathing sounded uneven. I don't blame him anymore. Fear makes people do terrible things. The tape hissed softly. Then Daniel spoke again, quieter this time. If I don't make it out, don't let this place disappear. Ellie's breath caught, because people came here carrying secrets long before me, and they'll keep coming long after I'm gone. Maybe one day someone will turn this motel into something better than all the pain buried inside it. Silence. Then one final sentence. Maybe someone kind will finally listen. The tape clicked off. Nobody moved. Outside, snow drifted softly through the motel lights. Ellie stared at the cassette player as tears slowly filled her eyes. Not because Daniel Mercer was gone, but because somehow, even at the end, he still believed healing was possible. Grace spoke first. He knew, she whispered. He knew this place could become something else. Ellie nodded slowly, and for the first time since discovering the hidden room, the motel no longer felt cursed. It felt unfinished. The following weeks changed everything. The Black Hollow Gazette published the full story, not just about Daniel Mercer's disappearance, but about Thomas Barrett, too. The truth, all of it. How fear destroyed him, how guilt haunted him, how he tried, too late, to stop terrible men from doing terrible things. The town reacted exactly the way towns always do when old secrets finally surface. Some people denied it. Some got angry. Some pretended they never knew anything at all. But others came quietly to Silver Pines Lodge carrying flowers, letters, photographs, and grief they'd spent decades hiding. And Ellie welcomed every single one of them. By spring, the motel had changed. Not into something modern, something honest. The hidden room remained untouched, preserved exactly as it had been found. But outside its door, Ellie placed a small wooden sign. The quiet room where forgotten voices are finally heard. People began leaving notes inside. Stories, confessions, apologies, names of loved ones they never stopped searching for. One teenage boy wrote, "My brother disappeared 3 years ago. This room makes me feel like someone still remembers him." A woman in her 60s simply wrote, "I believe you now. I'm sorry it took me so long." Ellie read every message. Sometimes she cried with them. Sometimes she simply sat beside strangers in silence while snow or rain tapped gently against the motel windows. And somehow, that became enough. 1 year after opening the hidden room, Ellie stood alone outside Silver Pines Lodge at sunset. The old neon sign still flickered. The parking lot still cracked beneath winter frost. But the motel no longer looked abandoned. Warm light glowed from the office windows. Voices drifted softly from inside. Life had returned. Grace stepped onto the porch beside her holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked quietly. Ellie looked toward the hidden hallway, then toward the old highway stretching endlessly beyond the snow-covered trees. Finally, she smiled faintly. I did, she admitted. Grace handed her a mug. So why didn't you? Ellie looked back at the motel, at the place built from silence, from guilt, from buried truths, and now, from healing. Because, she said softly, some places don't need to be forgotten. The wind moved gently through the pine trees, and for the first time in nearly 30 years, Silver Pines Lodge no longer felt like the scene of a disappearance. It felt like a place people could finally come home to. Ellie Barrett came to Silver Pines Lodge hoping to escape her past. Instead, she uncovered the pain other people had spent decades trying to bury. Daniel Mercer was gone. Thomas Barrett was gone too. But their silence remained. And Ellie realized something most people never do. The truth doesn't disappear when we avoid it. Neither does pain. Sometimes, all a broken person needs is one place, one moment, or one person willing to say, I hear you. That's what Silver Pines Lodge became. Not a motel, not a crime scene, a place where forgotten people finally mattered again. Because healing doesn't always begin with answers. Sometimes it begins the moment someone finally listens. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who may need to hear it. Because somewhere out there, someone is still waiting for their story to matter.